They called me a legacy artifact the morning they fired me, like I was some dusty piece of software that no longer patched, no longer updated, no longer useful. I'd spent 26 years building the company's backbone systems, payroll engines, customer servers, encrypted backup pipelines, code so old no one but me remembered how to speak its language. But the new CEO, a 32-year-old ex-consultant with slick hair and slicker buzzwords, decided that lean modernization meant cutting anyone who remembered when the company actually bled to survive. They escorted me out of the building before I could even finish my coffee. And as the security guard pushed the door shut behind me, I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Because in the desperate rush to modernize, they forgot something very important. I built the core. And I built the fail-safes. And one of those fail-safes was the dead man's switch. The switch wasn't dramatic. No explosions, no alarms, no cinematic countdown. It was a quiet little daemon script, sleeping in a forgotten directory of a server they didn't even know they still used. It woke up every Monday morning, checked a simple API endpoint for my authentication heartbeat, and if I didn't enter the rotating key within 10 days, it assumed one thing: I was gone. Not on vacation, not retired, not transitioned out. Gone. And it executed its protocol. Back when I wrote it, I never imagined it would fire in my lifetime. It was intended for catastrophic events, plane crashes, kidnappings, ransom demands. But getting fired without notice? The script didn't care about corporate motives. It had one job. And it began doing it the moment my credentials were revoked. By day 3, the company started feeling glitches, what the IT Slack channel politely called them. Their CRM began reverting to last week's data snapshots. Two-factor authentication tokens mysteriously expired midday. The automated invoicing system randomly locked itself for security inconsistencies, forcing accounting to manually approve every ledger entry. The new CEO sent out a chirpy all-hands message insisting everything was under control and that minor transition events were normal during modernization phases. I almost spit out my drink laughing. He had no idea what was coming. On day 5, the dead man's switch moved to phase 2. This wasn't just data reverting or credentials resetting. This was infrastructure self-auditing. Every undocumented change made by the overeager new IT director began rolling back. Passwords were reset to the old system standards. Firewall rules reverted to the 2018 configuration. The cloud migration beta deployment paused itself and automatically generated a compliance report showing that the new architecture violated several security protocols the CEO didn't even know existed. Legal was suddenly copied on everything. The board was quietly BCC'd on 2 major alerts. The few senior engineers who still respected me immediately recognized my fingerprints, but they stayed silent. They'd been treated like relics too. On day 7, I woke up to 53 unread messages, 2 voicemails from withheld numbers, and 1 email from the CEO himself, written in a tone so fake polite it nearly melted my screen. "Hey Daniel, hope you're doing well since your transition. Quick favor, we seem to be experiencing some odd legacy behaviors in the system. Would you be willing to hop on a call to help us diagnose?" I stared at that email for a long moment. Not angry. Not vengeful. Just satisfied. Because I warned them. I told them that ripping out the oldest tree in the forest doesn't make the forest healthier, it makes it collapse. And the dead man's switch hadn't even reached phase 3 yet. Day 8 was when panic finally seeped past the glossy corporate facade. According to a friend still inside, the IT war room had devolved into pure chaos. Half the servers were displaying authentication mismatches the new team couldn't decipher, because the error codes predated their entire careers. The payroll engine kept reverting to an older compensation structure, one that reflected the correct overtime laws instead of the cost-saving reinterpretations HR had quietly implemented. That alone triggered a massive compliance audit. Finance tried to stop the audit, only to learn they no longer had admin-level permissions. The switch had stripped every executive of elevated access and reassigned it to a non-existent account, Legacy Root. The new CEO asked who Legacy Root belonged to. Four people told him the same thing: Daniel created it. If Legacy Root is active, you should probably start praying. The real problem, though, was Phase 3. Unlike the first two phases, which merely inconvenienced, Phase 3 protected. It protected employees from exploitation. It protected clients from fraud. It protected the integrity of systems I spent decades nurturing. And most importantly, it protected me. At exactly 2 a.m., the switch scanned every major directory for disputes, illegal modifications, financial misrepresentations, and audit violations. Anything it found, it packaged automatically and sent to the appropriate oversight agency. IRS, OSHA, FTC, SEC, Department of Labor. It didn't embellish or dramatize. It didn't accuse. It simply provided logs, timestamps, evidence. Cold, irrefutable evidence, the kind that sinks companies before sunrise. When the board arrived for their emergency conference call that morning, they were greeted not by their CEO's usual buzzword pep talk but by a legal counsel with dark circles under his eyes and a tone that suggested he was rapidly calculating escape routes. He broke the news carefully. Federal regulators had already acknowledged receipt of the auto-submitted packets. There were questions. There would be investigations. One board member reportedly asked why the hell such a mechanism existed. The CEO stammered something about legacy paranoia and old engineering culture. But my friend in the room said the CFO quietly muttered, "No, that's not paranoia. That's survival instinct." And we fired the guy who understood it. They spent the rest of the day trying to break the system free from Legacy Root, but the failsafe did exactly what it was designed to do: protect itself from tampering unless authenticated by a code sequence only I knew. They tried brute forcing it, but the switch simply sandboxed itself further, isolating every critical system behind encryption layers so old and obscure they might as well have been runes carved in stone. Most people think modern encryption is strong. They forget the stuff we made before everything went plug and play. That old code wasn't pretty, but it was vicious. Late that evening, they finally reached out to me again, this time through the board. The message was simple: we need your help. Name your price. And let me tell you, I really sat with that for a moment. I imagined walking back into that building, every executive suddenly deferential, every IT guy respecting the ground I walked on, every person who dismissed me as a relic realizing I'd been the spine holding the whole organism upright. And a part of me wanted it. I won't lie. The recognition, the vindication, it was tempting. But then I remembered the way they fired me. How little they valued people who built the foundations they stood on. How quick they were to discard experience in favor of trend-chasing modernization. They didn't need my help. They needed a lesson. And the dead man's switch still had one more phase they hadn't anticipated, one I'd added after surviving my first round of layoffs 15 years earlier. I opened my laptop, typed one command, and began Phase 4. When the heartbeat signal returned, the entire company behaved as if oxygen had suddenly been pumped back into a sealed chamber. Supervisors cheered. HR staff cried. The IT department let out this collective, broken exhale like they'd been holding their breath for days, which, honestly, they had. But I didn't celebrate with them. I sat alone in my home office, watching lines of diagnostic logs scroll across my monitor, feeling something bitter and satisfying settle in my chest. Not joy. Not triumph. Something deeper. Something like closure. For the first time in months, the system felt exactly as it should: stable, predictable, secure. It was people who had made it unstable. And now those same people were scrambling to prove they had learned their lesson. The board scheduled a formal reinstatement meeting for the next morning, but they underestimated how many messes remained. CEO gone. IT director gone. Half the modernization team fired or transitioned. Union reps circling like hawks. Government partners requesting reports. The building looked like a battlefield at 9 a.m., executives in disheveled suits, coffee stains on their sleeves, silent arguments happening in corners. Yet the moment I walked in, everything stopped. People I had worked with for 20-plus years stared at me with a mix of gratitude and guilt. Some nodded quietly. Others avoided eye contact. But one thing was clear: I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't a relic. I was the person who held the company together. And everyone knew it. The board chair approached first. A stoic woman in her 60s, the only one who had never bought into the legacy purge nonsense. She didn't shake my hand, she clasped it with both of hers. "You saved thousands of jobs," she said simply. Whether they admit it or not. It struck me then that my dead man's switch wasn't revenge. It wasn't spite. It was protection, protection the company didn't deserve, but the workers did. The laborers. The administrators. The field teams. The people who made the place run. The reinstatement meeting itself felt almost like a formality. They granted every condition I demanded. Even the ones I added at the last minute. Full executive-level authority over systems architecture. A hand-picked team. No age-based restructuring. Immediate reinstatement of veteran engineers who had been sidelined. A new policy banning competency dismissals without a technical review board. And a salary that made my old paycheck look like a rounding error. But the part that hit hardest wasn't the money or the authority. It was when one of the older engineers, Tom, nearing retirement, approached me afterward. He placed a hand on my shoulder and said, voice trembling, "Thank you for fighting for us. Nobody ever does." In that moment, every long night, every overlooked contribution, every time I'd been dismissed as legacy, every sting of humiliation suddenly felt worth it. Over the next week, I rebuilt my department, but not the way it used to be. I didn't want to return to an era of quiet suffering. I wanted a fortress. A culture where knowledge was respected, where experience wasn't treated like a glitch in the system. And for the first time, the company listened. Not because they wanted to, but because they understood the price of ignoring people like me. It wasn't lost on anyone that the former CEO had gone silent. Rumors swirled, lawsuits, investigations, non-disclosure agreements. The last I heard, he had retreated to an offshore property, trying to rebuild his shattered reputation by pretending none of this had happened. But the truth was written across the company's recovery timeline. The timestamps. The logs. The board memos. History would remember exactly when everything collapsed, and exactly who brought it back online. Ironically, employees started calling the system something new, the Sentinel. Not because it guarded data, but because it guarded people. I didn't correct them. I liked it more than Dead Man's Switch, and honestly, it fit better. As for me, I settled back into my office one quiet afternoon, the familiar hum of servers drifting through the walls, a cup of fresh coffee at my side. My badge had been reissued with a new title, a higher clearance level, and a subtle but powerful label embossed at the bottom, Critical Personnel. I couldn't help but smile. Legacy, huh? Funny thing about legacy. It survives you. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it saves you too. In the weeks that followed, The company began moving with a caution it hadn't shown in decades. Every exec meeting opened with a technical briefing now. Every system update required cross-departmental sign-off. People spoke to engineers with something unfamiliar in their voices: respect. And whenever someone whispered the phrase legacy workforce, it carried a very different meaning than it used to. Not outdated. Not obsolete. But foundational. Enduring. Untouchable. Still, something gnawed at me. Not guilt. Not fear. Something else, an instinct honed from decades of putting out fires before management even smelled the smoke. A sense that the collapse had only revealed the surface layer of decay. So I started digging. Quietly. Discreetly. Pulling logs, reviewing archived change requests, tracing unauthorized access attempts. And what I found confirmed what I had suspected all along: the modernization project hadn't just been reckless. It had been dangerous. Buried beneath flashy dashboards and AI dashboards was a rushed tangle of unvetted code. Half-finished scripts patched over by junior devs who were forced to meet imaginary deadlines. Security shortcuts disguised as streamlining. And, most damning of all, several attempted deployments that would have exposed millions of client files to external vendors. Not by accident, but by design. They had been trying to sell the infrastructure piece by piece overseas, converting data integrity into profit. When I presented my findings to the board, they stared in stunned silence. One of them whispered, "We could have lost everything." Another muttered, "We almost did." For the first time in years, the room didn't feel like a corporate battlefield. It felt like a crisis command center. A place where decisions actually mattered. And they understood, finally, why the switch existed. Why I built it. Why experience isn't something you can automate or outsource or replace with a shiny new MBA. Word traveled quietly but quickly. Employees approached me in the hall, thanking me, not with the stiff politeness of corporate courtesy, but with genuine relief. The atmosphere changed. People no longer rushed past each other. Departments collaborated instead of competing. The fear that had haunted the place since the modernization era dispersed like dust shaken off an old server rack. But the biggest change came 3 weeks later when the board informed me that they wanted to create a new division, Infrastructure Continuity, and asked me to lead it. Not manage it. Lead it. With full authority. No micromanagers. No consultants. No ladder climbers pretending to innovate by dismantling everything. I accepted, but with one condition: I wanted to choose every member. I built a team of veterans, young talents hungry to learn, and overlooked employees who had been sidelined by every previous reorganization. The ones with grit. The ones with curiosity. The ones who cared. When we launched the division, the building erupted in applause. Even the interns knew something monumental had shifted. Then came the day I knew was inevitable, when the board chair pulled me aside with a sealed envelope. Inside was a short letter from the former CEO. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just a single sentence scrawled in cheap ink: "You never should have had that kind of power." I folded the paper, tucked it back into the envelope, and handed it to her. "That's the difference," I said. "I never used it until they made it necessary." She smiled, not with amusement, but with a recognition that only comes from surviving the same storm. "And that," she replied, "is exactly why you're the one who should have it." By the time I returned to my office, something inside me finally settled. Not revenge. Not vindication. But peace. A quiet knowledge that, in the end, the system held, not because of machines or modernization, but because people built it with sweat, patience, and care. And some people defend what they build, whether the company deserves it or not. whether leadership understands it or not, whether history remembers it or not. But in this case, history would remember. Because the new employee handbook included something no previous version ever had, a full-page protocol built around one idea: continuity is not a luxury. It is the lifeline. And beneath it, in small print, originally designed and implemented by D. Hale, Senior Architect, 1999. For the first time in a long time, I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and allowed myself a rare, genuine smile. Legacy. They had tried to weaponize the word against me. Instead, they engraved it into the company's future. In the months that followed, the company moved with a steadiness it had not known in years. There were no more rushed initiatives, no more ego-driven experiments, no more executives trying to impress shareholders with buzzwords they couldn't define. Instead, there was structure. There was discipline. There was respect. And the culture shift didn't begin in the boardroom. It began on the floor, among the engineers, the analysts, the technicians, the ones who had kept the lights on long before anyone upstairs had realized the bulbs were flickering. My new division, Infrastructure Continuity, became the backbone of that transformation. We rebuilt the system from the inside out, piece by piece, cleaning up years of neglect and patchwork. And as the fortress strengthened, so did the people. Veteran employees once pushed aside as old guard were suddenly mentoring hungry new talent. Cross-department meetings grew productive. Project managers actually listened. Even HR started asking for technical briefings before approving major personnel moves. The company felt alive again. Not shiny. Not perfect. But grounded. Occasionally, I'd find myself walking the long corridor between my office and the server room, listening to the quiet hum pulsing through the building. There was something reassuring about that sound, the steady, rhythmic heartbeat of a machine that didn't lie, didn't scheme, didn't play politics. In a strange way, that hum had always been more honest than most of the executives I'd worked under. And now, finally, the company itself felt just as honest. News of the collapse, and the miraculous rebuild that followed, eventually leaked. Reporters wanted statements. Tech journals wanted interviews. Analysts wanted to spin the story into a management case study. I declined all of it. That wasn't the point. The real victory wasn't public. It existed quietly in paychecks that kept cashing. In families who didn't have to uproot their lives. In retirees whose pensions remained intact. In the junior engineer who stopped me one morning in the lobby and said, with tears in her eyes, "I didn't think anyone would ever fight for us." That moment stayed with me. Because in all the chaos, all the corporate warfare, all the near collapse, that right there was the truth. They had fired me for being legacy. They had treated experience like clutter. They had gambled the company's life on arrogance. And yet, when everything fell apart, it wasn't the visionaries who saved it. It wasn't the consultants. It wasn't the execs with shiny degrees and empty resumes. It was the ones who remembered how the foundation was built. One evening, as I prepared to leave for the day, I paused outside my office and looked back. On the wall hung the new organizational chart, sleek, precise, secure. My division anchored the entire left side. At the top of it was my name. And under it, embossed in tiny silver letters, was a line the board had insisted on adding: Foundational Architect. I didn't ask for it. I didn't need it. But seeing it there, quietly honoring everything they had once dismissed, it filled me with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. Not pride. Not vengeance. Just certainty. Certainty that the next time someone young and cocky and catastrophically uninformed tried to tear the company apart in the name of progress, they would hit a wall far stronger than my dead man switch. They would hit the culture I rebuilt from the ashes. And maybe, for the first time in my career, I finally understood what legacy actually meant. Not something fading. Not something outdated. But something enduring. Something that survives the people who try to erase it. Something that stands, quietly, stubbornly, long after the noise has burned away. I turned off the lights, closed the office door, and walked out with the weight finally gone from my shoulders. My story with the company wasn't revenge. It wasn't even justice. It was restoration. And restoration, I realized, is the purest kind of victory there is.